Order, please. Order, please. Before we begin with the daily routine, the subject for this evening's late debate has been submitted by the Honourable Member for Kings North. The operative clause being, be it resolved that all members do their part to ensure Nova Scotians who rely on wells and septic systems are aware that they could benefit from a free environmental home assessment. And that debate will begin at the conclusion of the orders of the day. We now shall commence with the daily routine, presenting and reading petitions. The Honourable Member for Hants East. Order. Your microphone's on now.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave table a petition, the operative clause, which reads, we the residents living on and near Highway 14 and Route 214 are regular users of these roads, which were last paid 26 to 30 years ago, respectively, do hereby petition the Minister of Transportation and Public Works to immediately place the portion of Highway 14 from the 9 Mile River Bridge in Hardwood Lands to Highway 2 in Milford and Route 214, both of which are very busy throughways for traffic from Halifax and Truro to Windsor, at the top of the priority list for capital expenditure in 2007. We wish to remind the Government of Nova Scotia that investment and growth in this area is being hindered by the roughness and unsightliness of these patched up roads. Mr. Speaker, 714 signatures, which includes my own, and there were 170 outside my constituency, 8 outside the province, and 1 signature from outside the country. So,
the petition is tabled. The Honourable Member for Queens.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to table a petition, the operative clause that reads, we, the undersigned, strongly oppose the development of another fish farm by Aqua Fish Farms Limited or any other company or individual in Port Mattoon Bay. The proposed site on the west side of Port Mattoon Island near Back Beach is located in proximity to several pristine beaches, Hunts Point Beach, Somerville Beach, Carter's Beach, Womaback Beach, Southwest Port Mattoon Beach, and Spectacle Marine Park, the Matthew Atlantic, which are pristine and invaluable sites ecologically, environmentally, and economically. We believe the area represents far greater value for its tourist potential and as a valuable lobster fishing ground and shell fishery. It appears also on navigational maps to be a shipping channel. We also support Mayor John Leaf's efforts to have the Back Beach, along with its associated dunes and wetlands, declared a provincially protected area. There are over 1,800 signatures collected to date, with 200 coming from Mrs. Wilson's grade 11 Oceans and Sciences class of Cole Harbour High, and I affix my signature.
The petition is tabled. Presenting reports of committees. Tabling reports, regulations, and other papers. Before we move to statements by ministers, I'd like to make a special introduction to the members of the legislature. We have a very special guest with us in the Speaker's Gallery today. I was very pleased prior to this session to have had the opportunity to meet with His Excellency Faroudin Gorbanov, Ambassador of the Republic of Azerbaijan to Canada, and his second secretary, Jahoun Shaver Diaz. I would ask them to rise and receive the warm welcome of the House. Your Excellency. Indeed, welcome to the proceedings here in the House today. Statements by ministers. Government notices of motion. The Honourable the Premier.
Speaker, hereby give notice that on Tuesday the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Nova Scotia Museum of Natural History is commemorating Holocaust Education Week, October 30th to November 9th, with a series of special events each Wednesday at 7:30 for the next 5 weeks. And whereas in conjunction with the Atlantic Jewish Council, the museum is hosting weekly discussions, film presentations, and hosting special guests to share views on the Holocaust. And where it is at the same time hosting the ongoing showing of the Nova Scotia Human Rights Commission's exhibition, Anne Frank of the World, 1929 to 45. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House thank the museum for partnering with the Atlantic Jewish Council to ensure The important stories communicated from these public events act as a reminder to all who listen of the internal need for tolerance in our society. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There's been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Contrary, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Transportation and Public Works.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas heavy trucks deliver almost 90% of all consumer goods and foodstuffs within Canada, and whereas more than 400,000 jobs in Canada are directly related to the trucking industry, and whereas September 17th to 23rd, 2007 was designated as 2006 as National Trucking Week in Canada, as a time to recognize the efforts of the many people in the trucking industry who keep Canada moving. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House recognize National Trucking Week to thank the men and women of this industry for their hard work and dedication. Mr. Speaker, I seek waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There's been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Contrary, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And prior to reading the resolution, I would like to make an introduction.
Please
if I
do.
could. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to introduce a number of grade 9 students who are in the House today, students who are participating in the Take Our Kids to Work Day at the Department of Education. If these students could please stand: Joseph Gaudette, Caroline Davidson, Sarah Burrell, John Mullins, Alea Benoit, and Ariel Thompson. I would ask these students to rise and get a warm welcome from the House. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas November 1 is Take Our Kids to Work Day, and grade 9 students will be job shadowing in workplaces all over our province to explore the range of choices available after high school. And whereas the Government of Nova Scotia is committed to introducing youth to the career opportunities that exist in Nova Scotia and to providing them with the education and training they need to take advantage of those opportunities. And whereas the Department of Education has many programs in place, including youth apprenticeship, options and opportunities, and cooperative education that provide students with valuable workplace experience to help them make informed career choices and decisions. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House recognize November 1st as the Take Our Kids to Work Day and the importance of connecting youth with the workplace. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There's a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Contrary, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Human Resources.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, before I present my resolution on Take Your Kids to Work Day, there are a number of students here who have been chaperoned by various employees and parents from the Public Service Commission. And I would like to ask those young people to stand and also receive applause from the House. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas government's ability to deliver high-quality services to the citizens of this province is dependent on having a skilled, committed, and accountable public service, and whereas many of Nova Scotia's grade 9 students participating in Take Your Kids to Work Day are learning about various career options available to them through the public service here in Nova Scotia, and whereas having students visit government departments provides an opportunity to showcase the public service as an exciting, rewarding, and viable choice for young people's future careers. Therefore, be it resolved that members of this House join me in welcoming these young people to our workplace and sending a message of appreciation to their parents who are contributing to the future of Nova Scotia's public service. I respectfully request waiver of notice.
Request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Contrary, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Immigration.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas earlier this month, Canadians across the country celebrated Citizenship Week, and in doing so took time to reflect on the rights, privileges, and freedoms we all enjoy. And whereas 1,146 individuals received their citizenship certificates so far this year and are now new Canadians. And whereas these 1,146 new Canadians have decided to make Nova Scotia their home, where they will live and raise their families. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of the House join me in congratulating our newest citizens and welcoming them to their new home. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Agreed. All those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Contrary minded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Natural Resources.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Nova Scotia Nature Trust recognizes outstanding individuals and organizations that demonstrate a dedication to conserving our natural heritage. And whereas this year the Trust presented the 2006 Conservation Award to Mark Pulsifer, a regional wildlife biologist with the Nova Scotia Department of Natural Resources. And whereas Mr. Pulsifer's leadership and enthusiasm, especially for projects involving the St. Mary's River and watershed, have inspired his colleagues and students at St. Francis Xavier University. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House acknowledge and thank biologist Mark Pulsifer for his valuable contribution to Nova Scotia and congratulate him on winning this prestigious conservation award. And Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There's been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Contrary minded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Speaker. And if I could make a quick introduction.
Yes.
On this resolution, Judy Black and Alan McAvoy from the Heart and Stroke Foundation of Nova Scotia in the gallery this afternoon, the East Gallery. Judy Black is the Resuscitation and Rehabilitation Coordinator for the Heart and Stroke Foundation of Nova Scotia. Judy is a CPR instructor who co-wrote the Basic Rescue Manual in 2000, the CPR guidelines, and provided input to the instructor's manual. In 2005, she wrote the Instructor Resource for Resuscitation Program in Canada with her counterpart, Paula Richards from Newfoundland. Alan McAvoy is the Government Relations Officer and Policy Researcher for the Heart and Stroke Foundation, and I would ask them to rise and receive the warm welcome of the House. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas each November, the Heart and Stroke Foundation of Nova Scotia celebrates CPR Awareness Month. It is a way to remind Nova Scotians about the importance of recognizing cardiac emergency and what to do if one occurs. And whereas the newly updated CPR and emergency cardiovascular care guidelines make it easier to learn CPR, the Heart and Stroke Foundation of Nova Scotia is urging Nova Scotians to learn CPR. And whereas by taking a few hours out of your busy schedules to learn how to respond to cardiac emergencies, Nova Scotians can increase a person's odds of survival and recovery by 30% or more. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House recognize November as CPR Awareness Month in Nova Scotia and endorse the work of the Heart and Stroke Foundation of Nova Scotia and its call for Nova Scotians to learn CPR. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There's been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Contrary minded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Education.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Terry Wagger, a professor of St. Mary's University's Sobey School of Business, recently received the President's Award from the International Personnel Management Association Canada, and whereas the President's Award is the highest award attainable in the field of human resource management in this country and is equivalent to an honorary doctorate, and whereas this award recognizes the professor's high regard in his profession, his research and studies, his teaching, mentoring, and writings, therefore be it resolved that the members of this House congratulate Professor Terry Wagger on receiving the International Personnel Management Association of Canada's President's Award and wish him continued success and recognition in his profession. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There's been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Contrary minded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister responsible for emergency measures.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Nova Scotia continues to play a leadership role in cross-border emergency planning with our neighbouring provinces and the northeastern United States, whereas CEO Craig McLaughlin of the Emergency Management Office is Canada's co-chair of the International Emergency Management Group and was joined at a recent exercise in Vermont by colleagues from EMO, the Department of Justice, the Department of Health, and all U.S. and Canadian partners, and whereas Nova Scotia has been asked to host the next major international planning exercise for the members of these states and provinces, therefore be it resolved that all members of this House acknowledge the pivotal role played by Nova Scotia in living up to our mutual aid commitments established by Eastern premiers and governors at a conference here in Halifax 6 years ago. And Mr. Speaker, I respectfully request waiver of notice.
Request for waivers agreed. All those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Contrary, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Immigration.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Dr. Bridge Pachai, who has served as the province's Human Rights Commissioner and as the President of the Multicultural Association of Nova Scotia, is an author and the recipient of many local and national awards, including the Order of Canada. And whereas Dr. Pachai will soon be honored again, this time with the prestigious Gandhi King Aikida Award by the Martin Luther King Jr. International Chapel, Morehouse College of Atlanta, Georgia. And whereas the award was created to celebrate human rights and nonviolence and is named after three individuals, Mahatma Gandhi, Martin Luther King Jr., and Daiseki Aikida, three men from different cultures and countries who have followed a common path of profound dedication and achievement in improving the lives of all peoples. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of the House congratulate Dr. Pachai for this remarkable accomplishment and thank him for all he has done and continues to do in promoting human rights, multiculturalism, and diversity in our province. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Request for waivers. Is it agreed? All those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Contrary, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Service Nova Scotia and Municipal Relations.
Introduction.
On an introduction.
Thank you. Thank you, Speaker, and I'd like to draw the attention of the members of the House to the East Gallery, where we are joined today by Graham Conrad, who is the Executive Director of the Retail Gasoline Dealers Association in the province, and I'd ask him to rise and receive the warm welcome of the House.
Indeed, welcome to all our guests that are visiting with us in the gallery today. I'd like to recognize the Honourable Minister of Finance on an introduction.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'd ask the members of the House to join me in welcoming several young people who are visiting the Department of Finance today to learn about the workings of the Nova Scotia government. In the East Gallery, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to introduce my son Matthew, who has been here a number of times, not least for the budget, Mr. Speaker. Matthew is a grade 9 student at the Lunenburg High School, and thank all the members for voting for that budget, and look forward to that happening again. Joining Matthew in the gallery is Elizabeth Church. She's a grade 9 student from Clayton Park Junior High School, daughter of Michelle Church, who is administrative assistant at the Department of Finance. As well, we have Christina Redmond, who is a grade 10 student at Sacred Heart School in Halifax. Christina is the daughter of Kathy Shaw, our Finance Director of Communications. And Christina is joined by her friend Leanne Miller, who is an exchange student visiting Nova Scotia from Lafayette, Louisiana. Leanne is a student at the Sacred Heart School in Grand Coteau, Louisiana. Leanne's mother is a Melanson, and their roots go back to the Melansons who were expelled from Nova Scotia in 1755. So on behalf of the House, I'd ask the students if they would rise and receive the warm welcome of the House.
The Honourable Minister of Community Services on an introduction.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it's indeed my delight to rise today and welcome to the gallery my son Dylan, who has been here with us before on numerous occasions, but he's here today as the former president of the New Ross Consolidated School, a position which his sister now occupies. And having spent numerous hours in the gallery myself as an individual, I welcome Dylan here today, and I hope someday he can take his rightful place on the bottom floor, should he so choose. So Dylan, please rise and receive the warm welcome of the House.
The Honourable Minister of Immigration on introduction.
Mr. Speaker, I too would like to rise today in my seat to introduce two students who are visiting us from Hebville Academy. One of those students has definitely been here before, Kelsey Getson, and Hannah Harlow, a friend of hers who is visiting, taking part in Take Your Kids to Work Day. So I thank them for rising and getting up very early this morning to come in here, and I hope they have enjoyed their day in here. And if you too would rise and enjoy the warm welcome of the House.
I'd like to recognize the Leader of the Opposition on an introduction.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I hope the House will join me in welcoming back to the House Barbara Modi, who is currently on leave working out at Mount St. Vincent, and with her is her class, Stephanie McLean, Andrew Preeper, Lenore Parsley, Heather Wise, Sadie Tulane, Lindsay Gillard, Ashley McDougall, and Katie Hines. I'm sure that they will learn much from the House today. I understand it's a media class. They're looking at media writing. So they're not just here to observe us. They're here to observe the press, so let them know that. And wish you'd join me in welcoming them here.
The Honourable Minister of Tourism, Culture and Heritage on an introduction.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and it's indeed a great pleasure to rise today to introduce Alec Warshik, who is here and has been shadowing me today in my job as part of the Take Our Kids to Work Day. Alec is a grade 9 student at Caledonia Junior High. He's son of former HRM councillor Brian Warshik, who is here in the audience here today with him, and his mom, Kathy Boyd. He's a platinum student, president of his student council. He's also very active in sports, plays touch football, volleyball, soccer, and is also a member of his school band. Alex, I'd ask you to rise and receive a warm welcome from the legislature here today. Please.
The Honourable Minister of Environment and Labour on an introduction.
I'd like, in the gallery opposite is my new executive assistant, Kellen McKay, and I'd like the House to welcome her. Kellen comes from a very interesting family with very different viewpoints. On the same day, her brother asked me to go meet with Condoleezza Rice. Her mother asked me to join the Pugwash Peace Conference. So she's working with me, and I'd ask her to rise to receive the welcome of the House.
The Honourable Minister of Economic Development on an introduction.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm very pleased today to introduce to all members of the House a young individual from Barrington Passage. He's a member of the high school, the French immersion program, and I can assure that all members of this House, he will be a member in this chamber someday. He is 14 years of age. He's very involved into the political scene. He happens to be the president of the Youth PC Association in Shelburne. And he happens to be the secretary for the Progressive Conservative Association for Shelburne. And his name is Rick Clark. And Mr. Clark, if you would stand and receive the warm welcome of the members.
The Honourable Minister of Finance on an introduction.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it's my pleasure to introduce today in the East Gallery Councillor Don Swicker, a councillor from the Municipality District of Lunenburg, who's been here many times, but I'd like to again have the host give their warm wishes to Councillor Swicker and ask him to rise.
Before we continue in business of the House, I would like to say to all parliamentarians that take the time to provide mentoring opportunities to youth, it's very important to the parliamentary process. And all students that have gathered with us, I want to say how important it is and how much it means for us to be coming here. And I'm sure in watching some of the displays on the floor, there should be a program of parliamentarians shadowing students. However, continuing with the daily routine, introduction of bills. The Honourable Minister of Education.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 1 of the Acts of 2003, the Apprenticeship and Trades Qualifications Act.
The The Honourable Minister of Education begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to amend Chapter 1 of the Acts of 2003, the Apprenticeship and Trades Qualifications Act.
Bill 67, entitled An Act to amend Chapter 1 of the Acts of 2003, the Apprenticeship and Trades Qualifications Act.
Ordered that this bill be read for a second time on a future day. The Honourable Leader of the Liberal Party.
Speaker, I beg leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to amend Chapter 340 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Pension Benefits Act.
The Honourable Leader of the Liberal Party begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to amend Chapter 340 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Pension Benefits Act.
Bill 68, entitled An Act to amend Chapter 340 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Pension Benefits Act.
Ordered that this bill be read for a second time on a future day. The Honourable Leader of the Liberal Party.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Once again, I beg leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to amend Chapter 6 of the Acts of 1994-1995, the Maintenance Enforcement Act.
The Honourable Leader of the Liberal Party begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to amend Chapter 6 of the Acts of 1994-95, the Maintenance Enforcement Act.
Bill 69, entitled An Act to amend Chapter 6 of the Acts of 1994-95, the Maintenance Enforcement Act.
Ordered that this bill be read for a second time on a future day. The Honourable Member for Preston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I wish to introduce an act entitled An Act to declare the brook trout to be the provincial fish for Nova Scotia.
The Honourable Member for Preston begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to declare the brook trout to be the provincial fish of Nova Scotia.
Bill 70, entitled An Act to declare the brook trout to be the provincial fish of Nova Scotia.
Ordered that this bill be read for a second time on a future day. The Honourable Member for Kings West.
Speaker, I beg leave to enter a bill, an act to amend Chapter 1 of the Acts of 1995-96, the Education Act.
The Honourable Member for Kings West begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to amend Chapter 1 of the Acts of 1995-96, the Education Act.
Bill 71, entitled An Act to amend Chapter 1 of the Acts of 1995-96 of the Education Act.
Ordered that this bill be read for a second time on a future day. Notices of motion. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the NDP government of Saskatchewan reduced its provincial sales tax from 7% to 5% effective Saturday, October 28th, and whereas Premier Calvert noted that this would ensure that all Saskatchewan families benefit directly from the province's strong economy, and whereas Saskatchewan businesses, hospitals, schools, and municipalities among those whose costs have been lowered with this tax reduction, therefore be it resolved that this House congratulate Premier Lorne Calvert and the Government of Saskatchewan for lowering the provincial sales tax to 5%, and thereby ensuring that everyone shares in the benefits of a strong economy. Mr. Speaker, I would request waiver and passage without debate.
There's been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour of the motion, please say aye. Aye. Contrary, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Member for Cape Breton South.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas more than 2 million Canadians have diabetes, and by the end of the decade this number is expected to rise to 3 million, and whereas if left untreated or improperly managed, diabetes can result in a variety of complications, including heart disease, nerve damage, kidney disease, and eye disease, and whereas each year the Canadian Diabetes Association funds key research programs across Canada where critical work is done to help find a cure to this debilitating illness. Therefore, be it resolved that members of the House of Assembly recognize November as Diabetes Awareness Month and praise the continued work by doctors and volunteers in their work to find a cure. I would ask for a waiver of notice, Mr. Speaker.
There's been a request for waivers. Is it agreed? All those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Contrary minded, nay. The motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas today, Wednesday, November 1st, 2006, Spring Hill residents will gather to remember the 39 miners who lost their lives 50 years ago today in the Spring Hill mine explosion. And whereas this community was built on the hard work, integrity, and family values of those men and boys who on a daily basis went down in the mines to make a living for their families. And whereas the commitment they made to the community, which for many were during very short lives, and the impact they had on the town of Spring Hill and its residents is felt very much today. Therefore, be resolved that all members of this House rise for one moment of silence to remember all the men and boys who paid the ultimate sacrifice while earning a living for their families, thereby making a commitment that we will never forget them for what they've done for their families, communities, and this province. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and pass without debate.
There's been a request for waivers. Is it agreed? All those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Contrary minded, nay. Motion is carried. All rise for a moment of silence. Thank you. Notice this motion. The Honourable Member for Pictou West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Ralph Ferguson of Pictou has always been a strong advocate for the disabled community, witness his fight for accessibility improvements at Caribou Park and the new convention centre in Pictou County, and whereas Mr. Ferguson was recently awarded the Mel Heb Hourglass Action Award by the Partnership for Access Awareness Nova Scotia for demonstrating outstanding leadership and initiative in making communities more accessible to persons with disabilities, and whereas Mr. Ferguson has now started the monthly newsletter called Eastern Views to keep all informed of disabled issues and concerns. Therefore, be resolved that this Nova Scotia House of Assembly congratulate Ralph Ferguson on a job well done and thank him for his strong advocacy for our disabled community. And Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There's been a request for waivers. Is it agreed? All those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Contrary minded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Member for Pictou Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas an important part of Stellarton's industrial history was closed recently and pieces of its original machinery donated to the Museum of Industry, and whereas Luigi and Elsa Rastelli, the Italian-born owners of Rare Knits Limited, have retired this year after 48 years of service to the Nova Scotian and international communities, not only through their own business, but as employees of the original Italy-based Fini knitwear factory from 1958 to 1972. Whereas the Rastellis were well-known members of the Stellarton community and, among other projects, provided uniforms for the provincial Canada Game teams in both 1981 and 1983, where the province claimed prizes for the best uniforms. It also supplied exclusive Halifax retailer Mills Brothers with high-quality goods throughout the years. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House recognize the nearly 5 decades of expertise and service provided to Nova Scotians at the skilled hands of Luigi and Elsa Rastelli. May we use this opportunity to highlight the diverse industries that can be found in the small town across the province, and may we wish the Rastellis nothing but the best for their much-deserved retirement. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There's been a request for waivers. Is it agreed? All those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Contrary minded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Member for Halifax Citadel.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the following adoption for resolution. Whereas October 30th through November 9th, 2006 is Holocaust Education Week, 2006 marks the 3rd year that students at University of King's College and their community partners have organized a series of events in Halifax to educate the public about the genocide of Jews and other minority communities by the Nazis and their collaborators. And whereas education, dialogue, and creative expression through art and music are means through which we can remember the horrors of the Holocaust, reflect on the contemporary legacies of the Holocaust, and pledge to speak out against discrimination and injustice in our own communities. And whereas, despite all we may have learned from the horror of the Holocaust, we do not live in a world free of persecution and genocide. Therefore, be it resolved that this Nova Scotia House of Assembly recognize and commend the organizers of Holocaust Education Week for their efforts to promote tolerance and understanding between peoples of different faiths and backgrounds in Nova Scotia. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There's been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Contrary, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Halifax Clayton Park.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas National School Libraries Day was celebrated on October 23, 2006 with the theme Libraries, the World at Your Fingertips. And whereas school libraries staffed with professional librarians and library technicians have the potential to greatly enhance student learning. And whereas the aim of National School Library Day is to raise the profile and awareness of the critical role libraries and librarians play in education. Therefore, be it resolved that members of this House congratulate school librarians on School National Libraries Day and recognize their tremendous contribution to the education of our children. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There's been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor of the motion, please. Oh, I hear a no. The notice is tabled. The honourable member for Timberley Prospect.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Lakeside Child Care Centre is now open on the St. Margaret's Bay Road, and whereas this valuable new business has provided a welcome service to the communities of Beachville, Lakeside, and Timberley, whereas Kelly Skinner has worked hard to make the Child Care Centre a reality, therefore be it resolved that the Nova Scotia House of Assembly congratulate Kelly Skinner and the staff of the Lakeside Child Care Centre with best wishes for many years of success in the future. I ask for waiver and passage without debate, Mr. Speaker.
There's been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Contrary, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Glace Bay.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Mrs. Marjorie McNeil of Glace Bay is a volunteer at Tynamara Nursing Home, and whereas Marjorie McNeil has accumulated over 5,650 hours of volunteer time in the past 5 years. And whereas Marjorie has been spending 5 hours daily, 5 days per week, bringing baked goods and treats to the residents of the nursing home and keeping them company, and also volunteers with St. Vincent de Paul in Bridgeport, therefore be it resolved the members of the House of Assembly congratulate Mrs. Marjorie McNeil for her kindness and generosity to the residents of Tynamara Nursing Home and her selfless volunteer effort. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There's been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Contrary, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Hants West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Hansport Shamrocks were crowned the 2006 Nova Scotia Intermediate AAA Baseball Champions September 3rd, blanking the Pictou County Molson Canadian Albions 4-0 in the provincial championship game played in Hansport, and whereas the win by the Shamrocks marked their second consecutive major tournament victory, having won the Nova Scotia Intermediate Baseball League title the previous weekend, this time with a 10-5 victory over Pictou, and whereas the hosting of a provincial championship tournament cannot be done without exceptional dedication to field work and organizational capabilities, such as those shown by Laurie Johnson during the provincial championship tournament. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House applaud the 2 championship titles captured by the Hansport Shamrocks during the summer of 2006 and wish them every success in 2007 and the years ahead. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
This request for waiver is agreed. All those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Contrary, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Pictou East.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Everett Badu was an integral part of the 1st Squadron of aircraft based at Gibraltar in 1942, and whereas the landing strip there became the essential launching pad for the North African invasion known as Operation Torch, and whereas Everett Badu, the 23-year-old squadron leader in 1942, has recently written The Wedge in the Door to show the vital role this post played in the Allied military strategy and the human losses suffered. Therefore, be it resolved that this Nova Scotia House of Assembly commend and congratulate Everett Badu of Big Island, Pictou County, for his dedication and commitment to reliving, recording, and publishing this literary piece of Canadian history. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There's been a request for waivers. Is it agreed? All those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Contrary, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Kings West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Spring Hill mining disaster of November 1st, 1956 cost the lives of 39 brave miners and disrupted the lives of family and friends within the local communities, and whereas the heroics and courage of draggermen, rescue miners, and barefaced miners, those with no breathing equipment, who entered the collapsed mine and rescued 88 of their own, and whereas the 39 lives lost in that terrible disaster and all those who perished before and after them while working the mines continue to be recognized and remembered, therefore be it resolved that members of the House of Assembly recognize today, November 1st, in honor of those lost in the Spring Hill mining disaster of 1956. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There's been a request for waivers. Is it agreed? All those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Contrary, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Victoria the Lakes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas a Victoria County business has recently been awarded a National Environmental Award recognizing its commitment to innovation and improving their environmental and financial performance, and whereas Fine Wood Flooring and Lumber Limited of Middle River received the award at the Eco-Efficiency Centre's annual Environmental Excellence in Business Breakfast, which coincided with Canadian Environment Week, and whereas since attending the Eco-Efficiency Centre's Business Assistance Program in 2005, improvements were made and Fine Wood Flooring was ultimately rewarded for the proactive strategies it took to reduce its ecological footprint. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House congratulate Fine Wood Flooring and Lumber Limited for its responsible and innovative approach to its work. May we use this opportunity to encourage other Nova Scotia businesses to become more active in promoting the positive relationship that can exist between an organization and its surrounding environment. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There's been a request for waivers. Is it agreed? All those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Contrary, nay. Motion is carried. Any other notices of motion? The Honourable Minister of Human Resources.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day, I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Diane and Greg McMaster of Vintage Stove and Fireplace were named Business of the Year by the Amerson Area Chamber of Commerce October 17, 2006, and whereas Diane and Greg took over the business that her father started in 1999, and whereas in 3 short years, they've grown the business by providing honest, friendly, high-quality service and quality products. They are doing all the right things for their customers and their staff who are true team players. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House join me in sending our congratulations to Diane and Greg McMaster for earning this honor and wish them continued success in the future. And Mr. Speaker, I respectfully request waiver of notice.
There's been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Contrary, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Immigration.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas charity begins at home, and whereas fundraising is always necessary to help communities and individuals in need, and whereas Bridgewater Walmart employees donated $10,000 to North Queens Elementary School students after they lost their school to fire, Therefore, be it resolved, all members of this House recognize the staff at Walmart for their generous donation to North Queens Elementary School, Queens County. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There's been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Contrary, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Education.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Doris Patterson reached the milestone of her 100th birthday on July 13, 2006, and whereas she has raised 8 daughters, all of whom are home to celebrate her special day with her, whereas she continues to attend meetings of several groups within her community, therefore be it resolved that all members of this House congratulate Doris Patterson on her 100th birthday and for her healthy and active lifestyle. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of motion, passage without debate.
There's been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Contrary, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Member for Halifax Clayton Park.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to reintroduce just the operative clause of the motion I had on National School Libraries Day and read it again. I think there was a misunderstanding.
Please
okay,
do.
thank you. So therefore be it resolved that members of this House congratulate all those who work in school libraries on National School Libraries Day and recognize their tremendous contribution to the education of our children. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Contrary, nay. Motion is carried. Orders of the day. Oral questions put by members. Question period begin at 2:58 and conclude at 4:28. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And my question this afternoon will be for the Premier. This morning, Ms. Foley-Melvin would not describe the conversation that took place on June 20th with the Premier, during which she was dismissed as his Chief of Staff and offered the position as Chief Executive Officer of Conserve Nova Scotia. The circumstances that led the Premier to appoint Ms. Foley-Melvin to the new position are a legitimate issue for Nova Scotians who pay her salary. Mr. Speaker, my question for the Premier through you is, will the Premier please give Nova Scotians and this House a description of that conversation in which he removed Ms. Foley-Melvin from his office and gave her her new job?
The Honourable the Premier.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And indeed, as I said yesterday, I have every confidence in Ms. Foley-Melvin's ability to be the new CEO of the Conserve Nova Scotia, Mr. Speaker. And I think, Mr. Speaker, that if the Leader of the Opposition takes a look, we are well within the fair hiring policy in doing what we have done.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition on your first supplementary.
Well, that will come to a surprise to many, I think, Mr. Speaker. Ms. Foley-Melvin stated this morning that all additional staff being hired by Conserve Nova Scotia would be recruited using the normal channels. Now, as we know, Heather Foley-Melvin did not have to go through any normal channels in order to get her current position, which comes with an annual salary of $130,000 as well as a very generous benefits package. So, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to ask the Premier, why does he feel it was appropriate to allow Ms. Heather Foley-Melvin's appointment to avoid the normal channels of public service recruitment?
The Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, and I will ensure that the Leader of the Opposition receives a copy of the fair hiring policy, and indeed, this position conformed to that policy, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition on your final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, when questioned about her connection to Rob Bathison, a consultant hired by Conserve Nova Scotia to communicate its message to Cabinet, Heather Foley-Melvin stated, "We all have our circle of friends." Well, Mr. Speaker, everyone has friends, but few among us can appoint our friends to jobs paying more than $130,000. The Premier has already taken advantage of the normal goodwill of Nova Scotians by giving such an important, highly paid job to one of his political staff without an open recruitment process, Mr. Speaker. So I would ask the Premier, does he feel free to give more of this province's senior public service positions to political staff and others in his circle of friends?
The Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, this government will always conform to the fair hiring policies, Mr. Speaker, that have been put in place. But that, Mr. Speaker, that that caucus over there should be ashamed of how they treated an individual this morning, Mr. Speaker, by personally attacking an individual who's working hard on behalf of this province, Mr. Speaker, while this side, instead of doing what they're doing and criticizing this person on a personal basis, Mr. Speaker, they should be celebrating the fact that we do have this new agency in place.
The honourable member for Kings West.
Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Premier. Mr. Speaker, today in public accounts, we had Ms. Foley-Melvin as a witness before us. She confirmed today what was widely believed all along, that the scope and mandate of Conserve Nova Scotia did not come from the Department of Energy, did not come from energy experts from within the department, and it certainly did not come from outside individuals with vast expertise in the field. The mandate for this agency came from within the Premier's office. My question to the Premier is, assuming there are no experts in the Premier's office, why did you not allow the mandate for this important agency to be drafted at the department?
The Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, indeed, we made a commitment in our platform with respect to Conserve Nova Scotia, Mr. Speaker, and I'll be more than happy to provide a copy to the honourable member.
The honourable member for Kings West on your first supplementary.
So my question to the Premier is, well, Mr. Speaker, we are also told by Ms. Foley-Melvin that all the employees in her agency will be put through a fair, competitive hiring process. Well, this is certainly something I applaud, but I also think leadership comes from the top. This isn't a good example for you to set, Premier, when our most senior positions are political appointments and not held to the same standard as other employees in the agency. In fact, most will have to have a greater background. So I want to give you a chance today, Mr. Premier, to tell all Nova Scotians this practice will end for good. Will you commit today to put every civil servant position in this government through a fair and competitive process?
The Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, we will indeed be following the policies that are in place, Mr. Speaker. But I want to agree, Mr. Speaker, with another member of that caucus this morning, the member from Preston, who said, and I quote about Mrs. Foley-Melvin, he said, "I believe you will do an excellent job at Conserve Nova Scotia." End quote.
The honourable member for Kings West on your final supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, Ms. Foley-Melvin may work out okay, but Nova Scotians are under a cloud of suspicion. And they are sick, Mr. Premier, of patronage appointments, especially ones of this magnitude. People in this province deserve better. They demand that in the highest quality of an individual who will provide the highest level of expertise will be in positions within government to provide the citizens with the best possible services. This is clearly not the case here today. My question to the Premier, will you revoke your political appointment of Ms. Heather Foley-Melvin and allow for a fair and competitive process to take place for this position?
The Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, as I stated earlier, Mr. Speaker, I believe that Ms. Foley-Melvin will do an excellent job in her new position. I believe that Conserve Nova Scotia will prove to have a lasting impact in this province through the various programs that will be introduced, Mr. Speaker. And indeed, this government did follow the fair hiring policy which is in place and which, Mr. Speaker, I know that the previous government certainly would have followed as well.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Premier from Heather Foley-Melvin to a subject which she's going to have to deal with, Mr. Speaker. Last Monday, the British government published the Stern Review on the economics of climate change. Sir Nicholas Stern, a renowned economist, states simply that if we adopt a business-as-usual mentality to our growing levels of carbon emissions, the consequences will take humans into unknown territory. So my question for the Premier is this: do you accept Stern's conclusions that a substantial reduction in greenhouse gas concentrations in the atmosphere must occur before 2050 if we are to avoid catastrophic climate change?
The Honourable the Premier.
Speaker, I will refer to the Minister of Energy, who will provide an update on what's happening through the department.
The Honourable Minister of Energy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the province is very aware of the responsibility that we have to reduce emissions. Mr. Speaker, I would like to inform the Leader of the Opposition that we are moving in that direction and that we are putting initiatives in place to reduce gas emissions in Nova Scotia, a plan made for Nova Scotians. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition on your first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, the Stern Review concludes that energy efficiency has the potential to be the biggest single source of emission savings in the energy sector. However, the review warns that governments will have to assist families and organizations to make that transition, and in particular recommends measures to help with upfront costs of energy efficiency. As you know, I believe that low-interest loans to retrofit homes and businesses are a sound investment in this province's future. So I would like to ask the Premier when his government is going to introduce interest-free loans so that Nova Scotia families can save money, reduce energy consumption, and help reduce greenhouse gas emissions.
The Honourable the Premier.
I give that to the Minister of Energy.
The Honourable Minister of Energy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we talk about Conserve Nova Scotia. Conserve Nova Scotia is going out to stakeholders as we speak, Mr. Speaker, to come up with solutions to help low-income families. And we're very proud of that initiative, Mr. Speaker, and we'll have that solution shortly. Thank you.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition on your final supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I hope we get to it at a faster pace than they get to solving the long-term care crisis, I can tell you that. Mr. Speaker, the Stern Review states that emissions from deforestation represents almost 20% of global emissions, a share greater than is produced by the transportation sector. It recommends that action to preserve our remaining forests is urgently needed. So my final question to the Premier is, when are you going to put in place legislation to protect our forests, ensuring that at least 12% of Nova Scotia is protected forever?
Hear, hear.
The Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I refer that to the Minister of Environment.
The Honourable Minister of Environment and Labour.
Thank you very much for the question and for the opportunity to talk about some of the steps that we've taken in protecting our forestry within Nova Scotia. We're moving towards the 12% goal of protected areas. We're now at 9%. I was in Antigonish where we made a good news announcement with 8 new Nature Trust areas that are under protection. And I want to thank the member opposite for giving me the opportunity to boast about what this government is doing.
The Honourable Member for Cape Breton Centre.
You know, he talks about his studies. Well, Mr. Speaker, here in Nova Scotia, with the impact of the Stern Review, that could mean changes in how we govern the electricity market, changes we have already discussed and agreed upon. The Tory government in 2004 accepted 89 recommendations from the Electricity Marketplace Governance Committee, Mr. Speaker. That's 2 years ago of sitting on desks and gathering dust. So, Minister, if you want a document to study from, there it is. Why don't you implement it?
The Honourable Minister of Energy.
Mr. Speaker, I don't know if the member across the way is informed about the draft regulations that are in place now to address the electrical file. Mr. Speaker, that file is a very complicated one and we have to move very carefully. But I want to tell you that we have a number of initiatives in place, Mr. Speaker, to address that issue. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Cape Breton Centre on your first supplementary.
Speaker, when a peer report is done and a government chooses to ignore it, that's a problem. I understand the marketplace. Obviously, he and his government doesn't. Private investors, community groups, and municipalities want renewable electricity. They want it now, and they're ready to move forward. But this government stands in their way. The government has wasted opportunity after opportunity to draw down on federal funding to provide for wind power generation, refuses to ensure that renewable producers can operate in a positive business environment. Through you again, Mr. Speaker, to the Minister, when is your government going to ensure that renewable energy providers can sell their product at a fair price in this province?
The Honourable Minister of Energy.
Thank you for the question. Mr. Speaker, as I said, we have many initiatives, but I'll cite one here today. By February 2007, our government will approve regulations which will allow municipal utilities to buy from independent producers and allow that municipality to sell to their ratepayers, Mr. Speaker. I'm very proud of that, and we have other initiatives in place as well.
The honourable member for Cape Breton Centre on your final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, he knows he hasn't come within a mile of talking about Section 51 and EMGC, and he knows this. He's chose to ignore that report, Mr. Speaker, and the impact it will have in our ability for some of these people to sell the energy, particularly IPPs and stuff like SOC. So, Mr. Speaker, my final question to the minister: are when are you going to introduce an Electricity Act that your government promised in 2004? When are you going to do it?
The Honourable Minister of Energy.
Mr. Speaker, as I said to the member, this file is a very complicated one. The worst thing the government could do would be to move quickly. We have to make sure that we protect the ratepayers of Nova Scotia, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Liberal Party.
Mr. Speaker, given the current climate surrounding the volatility of the world oil market, and given that we consume so much oil here in Nova Scotia, what could be more important than investing in renewable energies? One of the most effective and sustainable renewable energies is wind power. Many people, both common folk and experts, agree that our province must move towards wind power to help curb high cost of energy and address environmental concerns. However, Mr. Speaker, the Premier's Minister of Energy is not so sure that wind energy is something he wants Nova Scotians to invest in because of concerns he expressed when he said, quote, "What if the wind stops blowing?" End quote.
He said that?
So, Mr. Speaker, my question to the Minister is, can the Minister of Energy tell us what expert advice did you get when you expressed fear that the wind might stop blowing in Nova Scotia?
The Honourable Minister of Energy.
Is lots blowing in here?
Mr. Speaker, there's certainly enough wind over there, Mr. Speaker, to generate power. But, Mr. Speaker, regrettably, that comment was taken out of context. I would like to say here, Mr. Speaker, for all of Nova Scotians that the Minister of Energy and this government, Mr. Speaker, would like to see wind energy advance, and we are putting things in place to make that happen, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Liberal Party on your first supplementary.
Well, you know, Mr. Speaker, hearing a Minister of Crown saying we're putting things in place is about on the same level as hearing what if the wind stops blowing. Mr. Speaker, the Minister's suggestion that wind would stop blowing here in Nova Scotia has brought nothing but embarrassment for our province. This government has announced that it wants to have 20% of its power from renewable sources by 2013. This is a measure we needed a long time ago, and 2013 is just far too late. This goal will be very difficult to achieve if we don't begin to make significant investments in wind energy and other renewables. Yet this minister has refused to allow independent power producers to sell directly to consumers. So my question is, what confidence should Nova Scotians have in this minister's ability to meet green energy targets for the province of Nova Scotia?
The Honourable Minister of Energy.
Mr. Speaker, I said earlier on today that this government is moving in a positive direction. We have now regulations, draft regulations, Mr. Speaker, in place, and that by February 2007, Mr. Speaker, municipal utilities will be able to buy renewables or wind energy. That's a move forward, Mr. Speaker. Also, Mr. Speaker, it's this government that recommended and will require, and the draft regulations are in place, that will require Nova Scotia Power to replace the energy that's generated with fossil fuels by wind power. That's another positive step. And also, Mr. Speaker, we also have other papers out and waiting for stakeholders to get back to us in the direction to allow yet further
Order,
wind
please.
energy, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Liberal Party in your final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, my last question is to the Premier. Mr. Premier, you've sent quite a signal to Nova Scotians about how low of a priority you place on energy efficiency and renewable energy in this province. You've appointed a CEO to Conserve Nova Scotia who had publicly admitted that she knew absolutely nothing about energy conservation. At the same time, you've put in a Minister of Energy who publicly went out and said he feared the wind would stop blowing in our province. My final question to you is, when will the Premier of Nova Scotia finally make our province a leader rather than a mockery in green energy?
The Honourable the Premier.
Well, Mr. Speaker, indeed, making this province greener is a priority for this government, Mr. Speaker. And as I said earlier, and I quote again from the member from Preston, Mr. Speaker, in talking about the CEO of Conserve Nova Scotia, an agency we're all very proud of, Mr. Speaker, and I quote, "I believe you will do an excellent job at Conserve Nova Scotia," and I couldn't agree with the member more.
The Honourable Member for Shelburne.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Community Services. Since being elected to represent Shelburne County, one of the key issues people come to my office to talk about is housing. Many seniors and families are struggling with limited incomes, and they need help keeping their homes in livable conditions. Yet they are waiting for months and even years for urgency needed help. My question to the Minister of Community Services: why are so many families with urgent needs waiting so long for help?
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and thank my honourable colleague across the way for the question. Mr. Speaker, there's no question that the province of Nova Scotia and this government takes the housing needs of all Nova Scotians very seriously. We are very pleased, Mr. Speaker, to be able to fulfill the $37.3 million commitment under Phase 1 of the housing agreement with the federal government to a maximum of 928 units, Mr. Speaker, across the province. We're preparing to move forward with $18.9 million under Phase 2, Mr. Speaker. And as well, Mr. Speaker, we will include, of course, the Federal Housing Trust of $23 million. Mr. Speaker, we look forward to providing housing for all Nova Scotians to meet the needs of all those seniors, low income, as well as modest and medium income Nova Scotians, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Shelburne on your first supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, on the theme of wind, it seems to be a cold wind blowing across Nova Scotia. Mr. Speaker, exactly. According to the staff members in community service, one of the reasons there are not enough staff to handle the applications for housing grants and loans. As of August the 8th, 2006, there were 143 people in Shelburne County alone waiting for housing grants and loans. Mr. Speaker, the number reflects only the process applications, so the number could actually be higher. My question again to the Minister of Community Service: why hasn't her department provided adequate staffing to process new and backlog applications for housing assistance?
Exactly. The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I took the opportunity over the summer to tour the province and visit some of the hard-working, dedicated staff members who work for the Department of Community Services in the diverse capacities that they do. Mr. Speaker, I want to inform all members of this House that the over 1,100 dedicated, respected, highly qualified staff of the Department of Community Services have my utmost respect and complete confidence in their ability to fulfill the requirements of their job, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Shelburne on your final supplementary.
Again, Mr. Speaker, the cold winds of this winter are going to blow colder. Mr. Speaker, the 143 applications waiting for help, 80 were for provincial $5,000 emergency repair grants for health and safety issues for families and seniors. Again, my question to the Minister of Community Services: when will her department put the resources in place to meet the urgent needs for housing repairs, not only in Shelburne County, but across this province?
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I was pleased to rise in this House during estimates and
remind Nova Scotians of the $3.5 million commitment that this government made specifically for senior home repairs. Along with an additional $1 million commitment from the Department of Health, Mr. Speaker, we're moving forward on ensuring that seniors, indeed low-income Nova Scotians, modest-income Nova Scotians, but more specifically, Mr. Speaker, seniors in this province do get those repairs that are so needy. Mr. Speaker, if the honourable member from Shelburne has specific requests that are not being met, I would encourage him to come and see me at any time to ensure, Mr. Speaker, that we're meeting the needs of all Nova Scotians, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Dartmouth North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my first question is for the Minister of Community Services. The Minister recently announced a pilot program that will allow 50 single parents in receipt of the ESIA benefits to attend university each year. But like other students receiving ESIA, they will have any shelter allowance they have to borrow through student loans deducted from their social assistance benefits. Shame. This means that your government believes those taking advantage of this program should have to borrow to pay for their rent. So given the existing inadequacy of student loans to cover the cost of post-secondary education in Nova Scotia, why does her government choose not to provide full ESIA benefits?
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Mr. Speaker, when I first took the position of Minister of Community Services, I assured all Nova Scotians that I would bring the 15 years of experience that I had as a member of the public education system to the floor of this House. Mr. Speaker, Career Seek is a positive program. It will empower Nova Scotians who are qualified to go on and seek post-secondary education beyond a 2-year program, Mr. Speaker. I'm extremely proud of this. I look forward to the results of Nova Scotian income assistant clientele getting back into the workforce, Mr. Speaker, breaking that cycle and being able to move forward positively, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Dartmouth North on your first supplementary.
Well, there's no doubt that the government's going to save money. Hopefully they are going to help people. I would not want to be the 51st person that applies for this program and gets turned down. Mr. Speaker, the average rent for one bedrooms in HRM is approximately running around $700. Even with a full ESIA shelter allowance and the student aid shelter allowance combined, it is inadequate. I shouldn't have to point out that a student loan is also just that, a loan that will add to the student's debt load for years after graduation. So I ask the Minister of Community Services, why is her government replacing provincial benefits with student loans instead of offering full support while her clients are getting an education?
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Mr. Speaker, for the next 4 years, 50 Nova Scotians will be permitted to go on to explore and experience the opportunities of a post-secondary education. I'm extremely proud of that, Mr. Speaker. That's 200 Nova Scotians who are qualified to re-enter the workforce, who want to get back to work, Mr. Speaker, and provide for their families. I look forward to meeting each and every one of those on the successful end, Mr. Speaker, of his or her education.
The honourable member for Dartmouth North on your final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, Newfoundland and Labrador is not so short-sighted. Recently, the government took steps to eliminate clawbacks of student loan shelter allowance through social assistance clients pursuing education. So I asked the Minister of Community Services, why won't her government follow Newfoundland and Labrador's progressive policy, move and provide full ESIA benefits over and above student allotments?
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Mr. Speaker, I'm proud to rise in my place today as a member of the Legislative Assembly of Nova Scotia, Mr. Speaker, and speak to a program that was designed specifically for Nova Scotians, Mr. Speaker, and I encourage all members of the House to be proud of being Nova Scotian members of the legislature, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Liberal Party.
Mr. Speaker, recently a meeting was held with members from the Strait Area Chamber of Commerce, Maritimes and Northeast Pipelines, Emera, municipal officials and Department of Energy officials regarding liquefied natural gas projects in the Strait area. The results from the meeting clearly were not what local officials and business representatives had hoped for. No assurances were given that the proposed bullet line from New Brunswick directly to the United States would not hurt the chances of LNG facilities here in Nova Scotia. There's currently an application in front of the National Energy Board to allow the Emera-built New Brunswick pipeline to go ahead with no bypass tariffs, placing New Brunswick LNG project at a clear advantage. My question is, will the Minister of Energy, why are you not actively lobbying and fighting for Nova Scotia's interest on this matter before the National Energy Board?
The Honourable Minister of Energy.
Speaker, Mr. Speaker, clearly we have intervened and we are intervening with the National Energy Board on this issue, and we take this issue very seriously, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Liberal Party on your first supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, we all know it should be the job and role of this minister and this department to fight for opportunities here in this province, and by not even allowing their position to be made public to local officials and businesses shows of lack of leadership. In fact, a former Tory member of the legislature seems to have a lack of confidence in this minister and his department when Port Hawkesbury Mayor Billy Joe McLean complained of a lack of information given from the Department of Energy officials. In fact, he's publicly quoted as saying, "What is their position? What do they intend to do?" No answers were given at that meeting. Mr. Speaker, the proponents of the New Brunswick LNG facility have been guaranteed that no bypass tariffs will be charged. This same assurance has not been given to the Bearhead project at Point Upper Richmond County or the LNG project in Guysborough County. So my question is, will the minister commit today that his department will attend the National Energy Board meetings and fight any attempts by New Brunswick to have an unfair advantage over Nova Scotia's LNG projects?
The Honourable Minister of Energy.
Mr. Speaker, I'm aware of the Chamber of the Strait area meeting with two senior officials of the Department of Energy yesterday. Mr. Speaker, I assured the Chamber through the senior officials that we're taking this very seriously, and I say to the Leader of the House and the Liberal Party, Mr. Speaker, that we are intervening, and Mr. Speaker, that we want to meet our objective, and that is fair tolls and tariffs for the people of Nova Scotia.
The Honourable Leader of the Liberal Party on your final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, we're all aware that this minister has not been actively fighting for the continuation and viability of LNG projects in this province. In fact, Mr. Speaker, we all recall that when Anadarko announced that it failed to get a supply contract, the minister's response was, "Well, I'm hopeful." Nothing more, no offer of help, no offer of leadership. He told us he was hopeful. Mr. Speaker, this is the same minister who recently told us he had concerns the wind would stop blowing in Nova Scotia. Renewable energy and economic development are the very things which concern Nova Scotians, and this minister is nowhere to be seen on either of these two issues. So my final supplementary is to the Premier. Mr. Premier, will you personally intervene in this matter to ensure that Nova Scotia's interests are protected at the upcoming National Energy Board hearings?
The Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I can assure the member, Mr. Speaker, that indeed Nova Scotia will be aggressively putting forward the position of Nova Scotia, Mr. Speaker, at the hearings as an intervener, Mr. Speaker. I can assure that member, Mr. Speaker, that we want to make sure that projects such as a potential LNG project or others have every single opportunity they can to move forward in this province, Mr. Speaker. And I can tell you, Mr. Speaker, that position will be put forward through those hearings.
The Honourable Member for Sackville-Cobequid.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question for the Minister of Health this afternoon. Even without the immediate prospect of a hospital worker strike, access to timely health care in Nova Scotia is in question, Mr. Speaker. Rural emergency rooms continue to close because of a shortage of doctors and other health care providers, Mr. Speaker. Surgeries are being cancelled, and Nova Scotians are getting frustrated and worried. The Yarmouth Hospital, like many other rural hospitals in the province, Mr. Speaker, is overcrowded and issued a code purple last month, Mr. Speaker. This means that patients are forced to use stretchers in hallways as beds and are receiving hallway medicine, Mr. Speaker. Our healthcare workers are overworked and stressed out. So my question to the Minister of Health today, Mr. Speaker, when is your government going to address the long wait times and overcrowded hospitals in the province of Nova Scotia?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the member opposite for his question. And we too are always concerned about the welfare of our patients. And when it comes to cold purple, of course, we understand the reason for cold purple. For those of you in the House, is that we have basically too many people in the hospital. They're using other rooms as they are available in order to treat these patients. Some hallways, sometimes they're in lounges, and it's an unfortunate situation that happens from time to time in other hospitals, not just Yarmouth. What we're trying to do, of course, is the pressure from our ALC patients or the alternate level of care that we do have is to find homes for them, to move them out into the community, which is why we're working so hard on our continuing care strategy.
The honourable member for Sackville-Cobequid on your first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, I've personally witnessed where Nova Scotians are being treated in hospitals, Mr. Speaker. They're being treated in rooms that you dispose of bedpans, Mr. Speaker. It's just unacceptable. And this government promised that it would shorten wait times in hospitals, Mr. Speaker. Despite this, Nova Scotians are still waiting far too long for surgeries. Acute care beds are being used to house long-term care patients waiting for placement, Mr. Speaker, creating a shortage of beds for acute care patients, in turn lengthening the wait times for surgeries. This government has failed to meet its promise to create more long-term care beds to ease the pressure on acute care and give the seniors the dignity they deserve here in Nova Scotia, Mr. Speaker. So my question to the Minister of Health, how much longer will Nova Scotians have to wait on stretchers in hallways in our hospitals, receiving hallway medicine, Mr. Speaker, before government acts?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I can assure all members of this House as well as all Nova Scotians that we're working to the utmost possibility within our department to make sure that we have the beds available through the continuum care strategy. 826 beds across this province, making sure we have the right beds in the right locations, making sure those decisions are based in fact and maybe not in places where they're not required. We need to be working on a plan that makes sense for Nova Scotians, and I think we're going to have a very good announcements in the very, very near future, and making sure that we have those beds available where they need.
The honourable member for Sackville-Cobequid on your final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Health needs to work on a plan and implement it now, not in 10 years. The crisis is now. People are waiting now in the hospitals, at home for surgeries, Mr. Speaker. Nova Scotians deserve the high quality health care that they were promised repeatedly by this government, Mr. Speaker. Instead, they're forced to wait for nursing home beds, wait for surgeries, and wait in hallways in our hospital. So I ask the Minister of Health, when is your government going to stop making Nova Scotians wait for the health care they deserve?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I can assure again all Nova Scotians that we're working our hardest to make sure that we have the resources available in the locations that Nova Scotians require them. Mr. Speaker, we've had tremendous success in making sure that we have the physicians and the specialists that we require across this province. Do we have more work to do? Of course we do. And we want to continue to work on those different strategies, making sure that we have the anesthesiologists that are required in our hospitals. Just recently signed on to an alternate funding program for anesthesiologists here at Capitol Health, making sure that we have those professionals. It is our estimation that we'll up to full complement in a very short period of time. So those things all take time and all take planning, and I can assure all of us Scotians that very soon that we'll have these things in place.
The Honourable Leader of the Liberal Party.
Mr. Speaker, in 2004, this government attempted to gauge the mood of Nova Scotians on Sunday shopping through a poorly worded plebiscite question. Regulations were later introduced to prevent shopping on Sundays, and the government thought they were done with the issue. Mr. Speaker, we all know what happened after that, but I'm not sure this government really understands the court's ruling, or more importantly, the wishes of Nova Scotians. Instead of taking even a few minutes to think about the consequences of his response, the Premier threw his hands in the air and refused to show leadership on this important issue. He has now left it open for all retailers to open any day of the week, including holidays, case closed. Mr. Speaker, my question to the Premier is, will you admit that you completely mishandled the issue of Sunday shopping in Nova Scotia?
The Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, indeed I believe that the government has taken leadership on this issue, and indeed, Mr. Speaker, if any political party in Nova Scotia has flip-flopped more on this issue, it's the Liberal Party.
The Honourable Leader of the Liberal Party on your first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, I think only Heather Foley Melvin in this province would believe that statement by the Premier when he makes that kind of a statement. Mr. Speaker, we are listening. Our caucus has been listening to the voices of Nova Scotians who have said they do not want to be working, nor do they feel the desire to be shopping on statutory holidays. Nova Scotians are appalled at the thought of large stores opening on Good Friday or Canada Day here in our province. While it has been this government's response to be reactive instead of proactive, let's take this opportunity to do what's right for workers, business owners, and the general public across this province. There are only 5 statutory holidays in this province, 7 days if you include Thanksgiving and Boxing Day, which were previously protected closing days under former legislation. So my question to the Premier is, will the Premier commit to reconsidering his original position and do what's right and what the vast majority of Nova Scotians have requested by keeping stores closed on statutory holidays?
The Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, on one hand, the Liberals don't want regulation. On the other hand, they do want regulation, Mr. Speaker. They don't know which direction they're going in, Mr. Speaker. This government has clearly put forward our position. We've put the issue behind us, Mr. Speaker. The reality is that what the Liberal Party and what the leader wants to see is law enforcement officers back out with the measuring tapes, Mr. Speaker. That's what he's saying today. He wants to see that. Again, we don't want that. We want them working on other things, Mr. Speaker, here in our province.
Order, please. I would just remind all members of the House that there is a bill before this House, so please keep your debate to what's relevant. The Honourable Leader of the Liberal Party on your final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, what Nova Scotians are looking for is a Premier that will finally show leadership and address the priorities of Nova Scotians rather than hiding behind his decisions and flip-flopping all over the place as he has done. On one hand, Mr. Speaker, on one hand, the government says we're not in the business of regulating business any longer. Shopping will be allowed all over the place. We're out of regulation. Yet they continue with gas regulation here in this province. The hypocrisy that's coming out of this Premier each and every day, Mr. Speaker, is unbelievable. Our caucus, Mr. Speaker, asked Nova Scotians. Our caucus asked Nova Scotians for their opinions on this.
Question.
Over 400 Nova Scotians responded. The vast majority wanted to see stores closed on statutory holidays.
Question, please.
My question is, will the Premier commit today to allowing a full debate on the issue of Sunday shopping on statutory holidays during this session of the House?
The Honourable the Premier.
Tell him to go to debate the bill.
Mr. Speaker, indeed, I have no doubt that I'm sure it's opposition today or perhaps another day, and I'm sure that one of those bills will be called, and of course there'll be a debate on the floor of this House, and we welcome that, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Sackville-Cobequid.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question again will be for the Minister of Health. Rural emergency rooms are facing temporary closures because of a shortage of doctors and other health professionals, Mr. Speaker. When emergency rooms close, it means that the responsibility of potential patients fall onto the shoulders of paramedics who provide the care while transporting them to the closest open hospital, Mr. Speaker. No additional resources, however, are being allocated to rural areas, which leaves emergency health services short-staffed and has the potential to compromise their high level of service delivery. So my question to the Minister of Health today, why is your government not providing more funding to staff emergency health services when emergency rooms continue to close throughout Nova Scotia, Mr. Speaker?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I can assure the member opposite that through emergency health services that we monitor the situations in all those areas and move around resources as required. Mr. Speaker, we have one of the best ambulance systems in the world, in my estimation, and I know the member opposite knows it very intimately as being a paramedic himself, and I can say that that service will provide all emergency services for Nova Scotians that they require them. Mr. Speaker, and I assure all people that when they do have an emergency, to please call 911.
The Honourable Member for Sackville-Cobequid on your first supplementary.
And Mr. Speaker, that seems to be the standard answer on all the news releases that government release right before they close an emergency room in this province, Mr. Speaker. Ambulances are dispatched under the System Status Plan, or SSPs, for each region, Mr. Speaker, and these regions overlap. When there is a shortage in one region, ambulances are shifted from another region to cover that shortage, Mr. Speaker. This means that when an emergency room closes in a rural community, Mr. Speaker, ambulances often are brought in from the neighboring region. as are required, Mr. Speaker. This stretches resources thinly across the affected area, not alone in rural communities, Mr. Speaker, but across the province. So my question to the Minister of Health, why is your government allowing this potential life-threatening situation to persist?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And again, to the member opposite, I can assure them and all Nova Scotians that when there's a closure, which we hope to try to mitigate throughout the year, but it is inevitable in some cases, that through the district health authorities, that they have a contingency planning for making sure staffing is in the right place at the right times. In the event of that EHS is of course available in the locations where they require them. Mr. Speaker, the EHS system is one that is run on data and best practices, and I have full confidence in that system in protecting Nova Scotians.
The Honourable Member for Sackville-Cobequid on your final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, paramedics and the ambulance crews throughout this province are always on call, ready to respond to any emergency, Mr. Speaker. The question here, Mr. Speaker, is the paramedics in Nova Scotia are qualified to deal with the patients that they receive as results of emergency rooms. We understand that they can handle it, Mr. Speaker. It's a question around the additional resources needed to meet the needs, the potential needs, Mr. Speaker. However, they cannot do their jobs well unless they receive those additional resources required to do their jobs, Mr. Speaker. So I ask the Minister of Health, when is your government going to fund EHS so that they can safely and adequately pick up the slack caused by temporary closures of emergency rooms throughout Nova Scotia?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I hear what the member is saying, but fortunately, we're doing just that.
The Honourable Member for Queens.
Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Minister of Fisheries and Aquaculture. As everyone in this House knows, Aqua Fish Farms Limited from Grand Letang, New Brunswick, has applied to open a 29-hectare salmon farm west of Port Mattoon Island. The Friends of Port Mattoon Bay are local residents, fishers, property and business owners who want to protect the bay by stopping the expansion of this farm. The bay is a natural resource that can aid in the development of the local economy through the lobster fishery, tourism, and other activities. Mr. Speaker, I understand that the approval process is continuing, but in the face of the mounting opposition, this government seems to ignore the local concerns. My question to the Minister is, why won't you listen to the local residents, businesses, and region of Queens and stop this development?
The Honourable Minister of Agriculture.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to thank the Honourable Member for Queens for that question. The Department of Fisheries and the Minister, more especially, is listening very close to the community and the concerns that the community has regarding that important project. But as well, the Minister is very concerned that all considerations are giving due diligence, and of course that would be working with the proponent, working with the community, and in fact the Minister, under the Minister's good direction and guidance and leadership, he has asked that a delegation go in and meet with Queens County Council. I understand that has been done, and Queens County Council was party to a presentation on behalf of the whole project. So there has been a lot of progress made on the project. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Queens on your first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, I was present at that presentation made by the Department of Aquaculture just last week, and I can tell you Council is very concerned, and we're not impressed with the presentation given. It just didn't provide enough information. The expansion is not wanted in Port Mattoon, and that was very clear when I tabled a petition today of well over 1,800 signatures. The local group that has come together to protect this bay is looking for information, and as MLA, I'm trying to get as much information as possible. We know the Department of Fisheries and Aquaculture have monitoring reports of the current operation run by Fish Farms. However, when the Friends of Port Mattoon Bay sought access to these records, they were turned down. In fact, on their behalf, I had to file a Freedom of Information request. Mr. Speaker, these reports should be part of the public record and as such should be made available when requested. Mr. Speaker, my question is, why is his department keeping this information from the Friends of Port Mattoon?
The Honourable Minister of Agriculture.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, the honourable member for Queens made a claim, an allegation that information is being kept from the people. I would take that. I would take that under advisement, communicate that to the Minister of Fisheries, and in fact make that commitment today that I will bring that to the Minister's attention. Thank you.
The honourable member for Queens on your final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, my final question is for the Minister of Environment. Far too often, this government is deciding to ignore the concerns of communities. We need not look too hard, and we can find examples across this province like the Digby Neck Quarry, strip mining, and now again in Port Mattoon. My question, when will this government give the proper consideration to local voices when making decisions that will impact entire communities?
The Honourable Minister of Environment and Labour.
Thank you very much for the question. We have a very strict environmental assessment regime here in this province that includes extensive public consultation and that is one of the more rigorous ones across Canada. In terms of the Digby Neck Quarry, for example, we have a joint federal-provincial review looking at this panel that was appointed jointly by the provincial and federal government. In terms of the Pioneer Coal assessment, we had public consultation. And in terms of the LNG right now, I just signed off in Goulbro. I just signed off for a public consultation in 3 regions. So we have an extensive process, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Liberal Party.
Mr. Speaker, it's now been 4 months since this government, with the support of the NDP, forced gas regulation onto Nova Scotian consumers. Mr. Speaker, the Premier put this system in place because he said it was what consumers wanted. He said consumers wanted stability over lower prices. Well, recent polls have shown that clearly the Premier does not have the pulse of the people. This Premier has forced consumers to pay higher prices, admitted the old system would give us lower prices, and still refuses to listen to the advice of his own commissioned study from last fall. Mr. Premier, you clearly put the system in place of gas regulation because you thought it would win you votes. Now we know 70% of Nova Scotians are opposed to regulation, and even retailers today are rejecting it as well. So my question is, when will you finally listen to Nova Scotians and abandon gas regulation in our province?
The Honourable the Premier.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And indeed, we have already made a commitment to the people of Nova Scotia that we would do an appropriate independent review, and that will be done after 6 months, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, I would hope, and I'm sure that the leader of the Liberal Party would also pay close attention to what that independent review will come back with.
The Honourable Leader of the Liberal Party on your first supplementary.
Needless to say, Mr. Speaker, our caucus has been listening to Nova Scotians, which is why we're pleased that that review has been agreed to and look forward to the results. Mr. Speaker, the Utility and Review Board was supposed to take over gas regulation from this government today, in fact. However, the UARB is recommending significant changes because simply the government got it wrong. So this government decided that they would keep gas regulation longer. Mr. Speaker, the UARB agreed with the Liberal caucus that prices, if regulation was going to be kept, should be set weekly, while ironically, the NDP wants prices set for a full month at a time. Mr. Speaker, this entire issue has been mishandled from the day it began. Any system which forces consumers to pay more than they normally would is not in this province's best interest. The only thing that stands, Mr. Speaker, between lower gas prices for Nova Scotians is the Tory government and the NDP party. So my question to the Premier is, how much longer will you sacrifice the personal finances of our citizens because you refuse to admit that you were wrong on gas regulation?
The Honourable the Premier.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And as I said, we introduced regulation, Mr. Speaker, to provide that price stability for the consumers of Nova Scotia, and those I've been talking to across Nova Scotia feel they are receiving that stability, Mr. Speaker. The reality is, though, Mr. Speaker, we will do the independent review. We will have that done, and we will take a look at what that review comes back with.
The Honourable Leader of the Liberal Party on your final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, the Premier is correct in saying that there is a review on the horizon for gas regulation, and we do certainly hope that that's going to be a proper review that will look at all aspects of the impacts of gas regulation. Mr. Speaker, the taxpayers of this province have already paid for a report which told them that gas regulation was not in the best interests of the citizens of Nova Scotia. That was last fall when the Tories at that time were opposed to gas regulation. Mr. Speaker, consumers are heavily against gas regulation and are sick of paying higher prices. New Brunswick recently made our province less competitive when they reduced their motor fuel tax by almost 4 cents. My final question to the Premier is, what plan do you have to ensure that Nova Scotia businesses do not suffer as a result of lower gas prices in New Brunswick, thus making us less competitive?
The Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, first of all, Mr. Speaker, the bill that enabled this government to regulate was supported by all the parties in this legislature, including that party over there, Mr. Speaker. Including that party over there. So you can't have it both ways. You can't have it both ways. Secondly, Mr. Speaker, if we reduce the tax rate, Mr. Speaker, on gasoline by what the member is asking, it would cost us in the range of up to perhaps $50 million. I would throw it back to the members. Where should that come from, Mr. Speaker? Or does he want us to do what the Liberal government in the 1990s and cut and slash the highway budget of this province?
Order, please. I would note to all members to be mindful of the length of time for asking questions and answering. They're getting too long in places. So I would now refer to the Honourable Member for Pictou East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Natural Resources. Mr. Speaker, in 2005, this department took part in a review of game sanctuaries and wildlife management areas. Yep. Their original intent on delisting these areas was met with a thunderous public response demanding that government do no such thing. In fact, a large number of the respondents called for added protections in areas like Blandford and Liscombe. The minister of the day's final decision was to leave the status quo in place. Yep. Mr. Speaker, when I asked this minister in July what his intentions were for these areas, his response was that he would not delist any. Really? That isn't enough. These areas need more protections. My question to the minister is, when will he finish the job of his predecessor and bring forward changes that offer these areas real protections?
The Honourable Minister of Natural Resources.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the member opposite for his question. Mr. Speaker, the member has quite correctly acknowledged that the former minister did do the public consultation. He listened to the people and he respected their wishes. Mr. Speaker, these game sanctuaries are there to protect the fauna of the province in that area, and that's what they will continue to do.
The Honourable Member for Pictou East on your first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, in some of these areas there is not sufficient protection. Mr. Speaker, people who sent in submissions are contacting my office and are telling me that they did not ask for the status quo. They asked for more protections. I know there is a summary of submissions received by the review available on the web, but to get a full understanding of what the public is looking for, I think it is very important to have access to the actual submissions. The only way I have to get access to these records is through the Freedom of Information Act, with a total quoted cost of $449.
Question, please.
These are documents that, for all intents and purposes, should be part of the public record.
Order, please. Order. As I indicated, I would ask that all members be mindful of the amount of time that is taking to ask and answer a question. I was just getting there, yes, and so is supper coming. So, to the honourable member for Pictou East, on the question, please. Just
My
the
question to the minister is why won't he grant full access to those public records?
The Honourable Minister of Natural Resources.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And to the member opposite, I appreciate his concern, and anything that we are legally able to do under the Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act to assist the member will be done.
The Honourable Member for Pictou East on your final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, I think it is very clear that more protections are needed. Liscombe continues to be clear-cut, and the Chignecto Game Sanctuary is currently under threat. The Blandford Game Sanctuary sits like a jewel on the Aspatagan Peninsula, but without protection, its future will remain uncertain. If the minister is unwilling to give overall protections to these areas, why won't he at least move forward and protect the Crown-owned parcels in these sanctuaries? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Minister of Natural Resources.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, I want to make it absolutely clear that this government has no intention of removing any of the protections for the wildlife in any of those game sanctuaries. Absolutely clear, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Pictou West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question through you is to the Minister of Economic Development. Less than a year ago, Trenton Works in Pictou County employed 1,000 men and women, and the payroll was $42 million a year, money that went directly into our local economy. Today, only about 100 workers are still there, and that number continues to dwindle. Only 10% of the payroll still remains, and the county's whole economy remains uncertain. So my question to the Minister: what is your department doing to ensure that Trenton Works remains a viable entity in Pictou County and an economic engine in the Nova Scotia economy?
The Honourable Minister of Economic Development.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and through you to the Honourable Member. I can assure that member that I have met with the executive of Trenton Works. My staff is dealing with them now, and we are looking at alternative means to use the facilities at Trenton Works to see if there's other avenues that we can explore to help generate jobs for that community and enhance the work place in Trenton area.
The Honourable Member for Pictou West on your first supplementary.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question this time is for the Premier. On October 14th, the Premier spoke after a meeting in Arrowshat in Cape Breton and was quoted in the Chronicle Herald as saying, "We're willing to work with them in whatever capacity we can," referring to Trenton Works. The article went on to say that the Premier has met with representatives of the U.S. Parent company, Greenbrier Company of Oregon. So my question to the Premier: who did he meet with, and what did he have to say about the future of Trenton Works?
The Honourable the Premier.
Indeed, Mr. Speaker, after speaking with the member from Pictou Centre and working towards yes, Mr. Speaker, after speaking with the member from Pictou Centre who was very concerned about the situation at Trenton Works, I met with Bob Hicks, Mr. Speaker, and following that, I indicated